Located at 5902 Clarendon Road, formerly 5902 Canarsie Lane, in an area of southern Brooklyn known as Canarsie, the Wyckoff House is sited in its original circa 1652 location, what is now within Fiddler-Wyckoff Park, a public park maintained by the City of New York. The red arrow shows you what is left of Canarsie Lane, while the dotted lines demonstrate where Canarsie Lane connected the house to the street grid before the road was eliminated. The land the Wyckoff House was built on was purchased from Native Americans of the Canarsie tribe by 1636. The land was later seized by the Dutch West Indian Company in 1652 and transferred to the Duke of York when New Netherland came under British control. It was during this time that Dutch immigrant Pieter Claesen adopted the anglicized Wyckoff as his surname. By the time the land was given to the town of Flatlands in 1667, it was occupied by Pieter Claesen Wyckoff, who had become a plantation supervisor for Peter Stuyvesant. Peter Wyckoff would go on to become a magistrate and landowner of great wealth while living in Flatlands. He and his wife Greta had 11 children, many of whom settled in Brooklyn, and it is believed that descendants of the Wyckoffs could number in the tens of thousands, if not more. The original section of this building dates to 1652. Later additions occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries, resulting in a much expanded house, as you see here today. The Wyckoff family stayed in the house until 1901, after which it went through a lot of inattentive owners, falling into various levels of disrepair. And this map gives you an idea of how long the house was able to stay on a large parcel of land in relative isolation. This map is from 1907, and you can see below the map how these parcels are meted out. This is the beginning of Flatlands, Brooklyn, and urban development, while up in the corner of this map you'll see where Canarsie Lane is, and the white arrow indicates where the Wyckoff House is. This house was documented by the Historic American Building Survey, HABS, in 1934. At the time, the condition of the house was described as in a state of disrepair, and though it was occupied, it was not properly being cared for. The previously wood-shingled main roof was covered in tar and roofing paper. Nevertheless, the roof was protective enough that the interiors of the building were reported in fair condition. And you can see in the lower right, this is the formal parlor, circa 1750. That was the fanciest room of the house. And at this time, it did look like it was in very good condition. This is the only room of the house that still has its original floors. The upper right is a shot of the attic. This is a Dutch colonial, it's one of the few early examples left of Dutch colonial frame building. It's a wood frame home, and the frames are put together with wood nails. It's all wood, and you'll see later that the attic is still in pretty good shape. You'll see that the chimney is on a tilt, and that is intentional. When you look at the home and you see that there are two nice symmetrical chimneys there, the reason they're so symmetrical is that they are both at a tilt in the attic. So that has to be braced, and you'll see later that that's still being braced, and in fact some of the bracing has been replaced. Here you can see some different phases that the house went through. The photo on the left is from 1937, and you can see that the house is in pretty bad disrepair. There's still tar on the roof. It looks like the other roof, the gabled roof, is really sagging. You can see also this is actually right now the front of the house where the cellar is, and you'll see later that the house was flipped around. Canarsie Lane went from the front of the house, which was the southern facade, to the north of the house, which is the now front facade. And it was Dutch tradition to build houses toward the south, but then when the road was changed because the house was symmetrical, the family just decided to flip the front of the house to the road, and it went right to the north side, and that's where it is now. The photo on the right is from the 1980s, after the house had been restored. It had gone through a lot. In 1953, it was almost demolished for road traffic. You can see that there's some industrial buildings back there. There's a school on the right. There's a car wash on the left. And at this point, it's in a park, and that's where it's going to stay. And now we come to the house today. You're going to see on the left-hand side the front facade, And then on the right-hand side, there's a close-up there of the old kitchen, which is the building with the Dutch door. That's the split door you can see in. And attached to that on the west side is what's called the wagon shed. That's just a shed roof, very simple building. That's the last structure that was added. That was added in 1870. And that right now is the caretaker's apartment. And here we have just a little trip around the house. The top photo you'll see is the rear facade. Again, that at one point was the front of the house, which makes sense. You'll see there's lots of windows. There's a nice door there. That's also a Dutch door. When the house was remodeled, from front to back now, there's a center hall pass-through. That's also a very colonial trait in the architecture. It's a characteristic feature. The bottom left picture is a side view of the wagon shed. You can see the wagon shed is just a flat shed roof with that high gable of the kitchen. And then the lower right, you'll see that is the east elevation. You'll see there's a stone wall there, and you can see the rubble foundation of the house. And here you'll see the current layout of the house. The front rooms, you'll see, will not be dwelled on because those are really insignificant, not contributing. There's a gift shop, there's a couple of offices. The contributing rooms are the common parlor, the formal parlor, the old kitchen. The wagon shed only is contributing on the exterior because the interior, as I said, it's an apartment for the person who takes care of the property. So really I focused on the interior, attic, cellar, main rooms that I just highlighted, and the exterior of the building for this report. And this is the formal parlor. This is a very significant room. You can see the exposed beams on the ceiling. That is a characteristic of Dutch architecture and also colonial architecture at this time. These beams are in pretty good shape. There's a little bit of the cracking there. Doesn't seem to be any problem. The floor is original. This is the only room in the building that has its original yellow pine floor. You cannot get yellow pine planks anymore on the East Coast. It was forested out, as we discussed in class many times. The wood is just gone. So it's a very precious, precious floor. On the right-hand side, this is a picture from 1953, and this is the same fireplace. And it's obviously been restored back to its Dutch colonial appearance. And here we have two very significant rooms as well. On the left-hand side is the common parlor. That's circa 1730. This is the parlor where all the work happened, the cooking, the eating. This room was built 20 years before the formal parlor, which was really the fancy room. It had a fireplace just for heat. This fireplace worked. And then, of course, on the right is the old kitchen. This is the first building, the part of the building that was built. You can see both of these building rooms again. You can see the beams, the ceiling beams, really important. These beams are in great shape, despite all the things that have happened to this building. Hurricanes, there was a fire in the 70s. The building is really standing in great shape. And in the kitchen, you can see there's a red, looks like a curtain. That is where the jambless fireplace was. So a jambless fireplace is a Dutch fireplace specialty. It has no walls. So it's a hearth with a fire in it. So the idea is that when you have that, the heat is going to circulate throughout the whole room. And that was restored when the house was donated. The family bought the house. The Wyckoff family bought the house back in the 60s. It had been in disrepair, and they donated it to the city of New York. And the city of New York created a park around the house, and that is why the house has been saved, because it's now part of a public park. And here we have the other interior spaces that are very significant. This is the attic. The left-hand photo, of course, is the attic structure. You can see the structure framing there. And then there's another photo of the attic. That's the upper right. And you can see it's clear what is going on with the chimney there. And you can see that there's modern bracing for that chimney. That chimney, the way it's angled, would not stay up if it didn't have wood supporting it. And clearly this wood has been replaced at some point. The building did have a lot of flooding, and the fireplaces have been closed off now so that moisture no longer gets in through the chimneys. So the fireplaces don't work. They're just decorative. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the arch storage area in the cellar. That is a root cellar. It's got some equipment in there that's dehumidifying and fanning. The cellar took about 5 feet of water during Hurricane Ida, and it's never really quite recovered. But still, there's a lot of interesting material down there, and it's very important historically. You can see the dirt floor. This is the original floor, the original foundation, and this is the original root cellar storage area where the arch is. Okay, so here we have some issues. The number one issue in this house, like I guess a lot of houses, is moisture. So especially outside on every area of the house. You can see in the upper left-hand side, that is some shingling. That is part of the roof, and it is covered in moss, and a lot of the shingles are green in this way, which is very damaging, and there needs to be some kind of mitigation here. Probably someone needs to come in who knows how to remove moss and have a look and decide what to do about that. It's very damaging to the shingles to leave it. It's a very damp area. There's a lot of tree cover. It's going to be hard to keep the moss away, but it needs to be at least mitigated, which has not been done. The photo on the right-hand side might be a little tough to see, but there's moisture on the eave underneath. It's wet there, it's staining, and then you can see down past the eave, the shingling is dark, and I think some of that is biological and some of that is moisture. The photo on the bottom, of course, is a cellar entrance, and you can see that there are bags. That's a special material. It's not sand, but it's moisture absorbing, and that is surrounding the cellars at all times. That's just to try to attempt to keep water out in case it rains, but clearly there needs to be a plan in place for mitigation for flooding, because that is a reality in this area of Brooklyn, and especially with the house. The house is below grade. It's below the sidewalk grade, and that is because it's been there so long that landfill construction progress around it have made the land go up around it. It used to be on a hill. Now it's sitting in a depression, and it's a bad situation in terms of water. And here's another issue with outside, probably also a bit related to water, but possibly related to the way the chimneys have been capped off and the fireplaces have been closed. On the right-hand side, this is a view from underneath the jambless fireplace, which is in the old kitchen, and that's how it's been sealed off. So it's been capped off, not very high up in the flue. So then this is the chimney, the corresponding chimney on the outside. Part of the issue with this is the brick is falling a little bit. My other concern with the chimneys being all closed off is they need to be monitored, because if they're not capped at the top as well as being shut in the flue, you're going to get all kinds of vegetation in there. You can see that this chimney is right next to some trees. You're going to get, who knows, squirrels, animals, all kinds of stuff. So there needs to be a maintenance plan for these chimneys where someone is checking them on a regular basis, probably at least seasonally. Okay, so inside, moisture is a problem as well. You can see on the right-hand side, this is in the attic, of course. You can see the bracing. There's some new bracing at the ridge line behind the beam that is in bad shape. That beam looks like there'd been some testing done on it, but it also looks like it has some insect damage, and it's also, I don't think it's cracking. I think something else happened to it, but it's still there. And like I said, these beams are impressive. They are really astounding. On the right-hand side, this is newer wood, and you can see that this wood is staining, and it looks like it's molding. This is right on the outside of the house at the rear, and it looks like that there's some water getting in. Also, walking around in the attic, you could tell that some water had been leaking in. So that needs to be dealt with right away. That needs to be solved immediately. Okay, and there's a couple more issues with wood. The picture on the left, it's a little bit easier to see that this definitely has some insect damage. I don't think the cracking in that beam is anything to worry about. These older beams, as we've studied before, they change over time. Some of these beams are hundreds of years old, and they've got some cracks in them that are not a concern. However, this beam looks like it has been fully attacked by bugs, probably powder beetles from what I was reading. And it doesn't look like there's any activity there now, but there should be a check done in the house just to make sure that there are no more insects. On the right-hand side, this beam is actually not in bad shape at all. It is in the formal parlor, and it looks like somebody has put some epoxy into that crack. Doesn't look great and probably should not have been done in a public-facing area. Probably the thing to do would be to test that out in a non-public area and then really check and see if you actually need to use it, because that beam in particular it looks like it's in really good shape. And this is the last big issue I wanted to talk about for this video. You can see these two sections of the rubble foundation. These are going down into the cellar, and it's just such a stark contrast. The photo on the right is one side of the cellar, and you can see that the stone is in mortar. It looks pretty secure. Doesn't look like the mortar is hurting the stone. It's in good shape there. Then on the left, you can see that there's just no mortar in this stone at all. I don't think that it's going to fall out, but it looks like it could at some point, and it probably just needs to be, it should have mortar, but if, you can't find the right kind of mortar, it needs to be strengthened at the very least and double checked, because people do use these stairs quite a bit. And that throughout the house, there are areas where there appears to be no mortar in the stones, and then there are areas where there's plenty of mortar in the stones. And I know you don't want to disturb this historic work if you don't have to, but in the name of safety and in the name of keeping this rubble foundation around, it makes sense to maybe explore what can be done about getting a mortar into that stonework. And that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. There's more information in my paper. I went into more detail, but I really enjoyed walking through this house and learning all about it, and I learned so much about Dutch colonial architecture, and I'm really glad that it's still there. Some of that is luck. Some of that is people really got involved in the 50s and 60s and said no to it being taken down. So it's a good story, and I hope you enjoyed it.